One of the most challenging and satisfying things one can do as a string quartet player is to learn and live with the late string quartets of Beethoven. They are arguably some of the most personal and profound works ever written, and provide a lifelong experience of discussion and growth. It's interesting that at the end of Beethoven's life, whether he knew of his impending mortality or not, that he chose to write string quartets. His last five works, Opus 127, 130, 131, 132, and 135, he chose to write for this incredibly personal medium of four string players, like-minded instruments with a very large tone palette and range of expression. And these quartets are, one of the challenges of these quartets is that range of emotion, character, and expression, and the constant contrasts of mood that he elicits, also the individual technical difficulties and challenges, as well as for the quartet, the complexity of the structure of the works, so many things. But I wanted to discuss a little bit of that today in the first movement of his Opus 132 quartet, which was written in 1825. He had written four movements, and then upon getting very ill, he had an intestinal disorder where he really thought he was going to die. And his doctor sent him to a suburb of Vienna, Baden, to recover. He changed his diet, and he did get better. And he ended up writing one of the most profound movements we have in music, the Heiliger Dankesong, which became the centerpiece of the quartet, the third movement. I find this opening, we as a quartet find this opening incredibly challenging for so many reasons. What we have in the beginning is this short introduction that is a four-note motive, which ties the entire movement together. This four-note motive is a half step going up, followed by a rising sixth, followed by a half step going down. And so these half steps create a lot of anguish, a lot of tension. So we have half step up, six, half step down. And this motive goes through the entire movement, and it's a little bit like your subconscious. This thought is always there, it's always present, even though it might not be the main thought, but it doesn't go away. And it's a lot like a puzzle when you're working on this, how to find that motive, how to bring it out, how to highlight it, how to find the tension in it without getting in the way of all the other important things that are going on. We've spent hours discussing where this motive is, and we actually have a score with how we think it permeates the piece. And this is ever changing and something that every quartet needs to explore on its own. But you can take note of some of our thoughts on that. So the only markings we have in the opening to go by are the marking assai sostenuto. It's not a tempo marking. It means very sustained. And we also have cut time, so it should be thought of it in two, and pianissimo. So figuring out the tempo and how to hold this first opening introduction phrase together is a little bit of a challenge. If it's played too fast, we lose the sense of the motive, the tension in the motive. If it's played too slowly and in four or even in eight, we lose the sense of sustained line that he's asking for. So, and it's very important. One of the challenges is the ensemble of the quartet. We're all playing these half-note figures that are echoing each other, but they're in rhythmic unison, that we have a group sense of pulse. So it's not a bad idea when you're learning this piece to pull out the metronome, find a tempo in two that everybody can practice with to understand how that pulse relates to each other. If it's played too soft and too eggshelly without core, it's very hard to have a unanimous sound. The sound is in and out. It loses that sense of line. The big discussion is vibrato. This is very very tense, very anguished, very searching. And if you over vibrate, it becomes overly expressive, but I think in a way it's more expressive with less to no vibrato. And however, that's changing as the phrase progresses. So again, when I start very little vibrato, I'm finding the tension more in my bow. Another challenge for the music of Beethoven is this constant changing of mood and these contrasts in mood and sudden interruptions that happen throughout. And after this opening, searching motive that we hear, the first violin has this cascading 16th notes, almost like trying to break away from the tension of this motive. And that leads to our first theme. And really, in a lot of ways, the music it's a lot like how we think. You know, you have a thought in your mind or a feeling, and then all of a sudden something else pops up, and your mood changes for a second, and you're thinking about something else, and then you pull yourself back to where you were, or you go off in a new direction. That's a lot of the thread of this first movement. So after this cascading 16th figure in the first violin, we are introduced to the main theme of the movement, which is a dotted rhythm that has a lot of anguish and tragedy in it, and it's developed through the movement. But I find it interesting that the first instrument that introduces this theme is the cello, and not just the cello, but the cello in a high register. And Beethoven is constantly playing with this in the late quartets, and especially this work, where the last movement, the Coda, the cello is way up in the stratospheres playing with the first violin in unison. And there's a sense of struggle because of that, and there's also a sense of triumphance in the ability to get through this. But right in the beginning, we have the theme in the cello. So again, you have the half-step motive even in the theme, full of pain. And it's important to note that the dynamics are so important in Beethoven. This is written in piano, and it's so easy because of the register to get excited, to play mezzo forte, to play forte, overly expressive. But there is a sense of intimacy even in the opening that it should be played within the dynamic of piano. So back to that idea of sudden contrasts, abrupt changes in mood and tempo. This happens in bar 20 and 21, where the quartet is playing a set of chords and quarter notes, followed by a sudden change to adagio. And it's very important that the three lower voices can give their complete attention to the first violin. The next mood change is not much further, a few bars later in the piece in measure 34. All of a sudden we've gone from all of this tension, anguish, and drama to something very lighthearted, almost dance-like. And in bar 34, the three lower voices have offbeat quarter notes. The next big challenge is the transition into the second theme. And we often have discussions about the structure of these late Beethoven quartets. And it is interesting. I mean, this is clearly in sonata form. However, Beethoven is breaking every rule imaginable. So in getting to the second theme, in the key of A minor, we would go to the dominant normally. However, Beethoven brings us to the key of F major. So in approaching this second theme, he is taking us to a completely different world now. We approach something that is almost aria-like. It's written dolce, and it has this very light-hearted accompaniment to it in the lower voices. It begins in the second violin, that's passed to the first violin. But in our rehearsals, often we will start with working on the lower voices, the cello and the viola, because they sort of set the stage with a very different texture. Here we have these triplets that are passed back and forth. And we often do this in our quartet, breaking things up to really get a sense of how they fit together. So after practicing the lower pairs, the violins can practice this new theme, how they want to play it, the kind of vibrato to create the dolce sound, and also how they connect those passing lines. The next very interesting moment in the piece is in bar 67. All of a sudden we have this dramatic bar by bar contrast. We have the dotted rhythm theme in fortissimo with forzandos on every beat, so emphasis on every beat, very strong and defiant almost, and followed by a bar of piano, so being able to get from this character to this character in a quick turn like that, it requires a lot of attention to detail, a lot of awareness as a quartet. How much timing do you want in between? How to get the sound of the fortissimos with sforzandos and the sound of the opening motive. So we have sforzandos, then we have at bar 75, now we are in a development, a very, very short development. This is very unusual, but for me, this is one of my favorite moments of the movement. It's the development is in pianissimo, and it starts in the cello. Maybe that's why I like it so much, I don't know. But it's the opening theme again, played in pianissimo. And what I think is so special about it is the way Beethoven is able to take the dynamic of pianissimo and create something that is highly charged. And I think it's because everything is in pianissimo. It's the sense of something is boiling underneath. It's incredibly, it's almost like the pot is boiling and the lid is on top of the pot, and you're holding this tension. And it's most effective if you're able to keep that dynamic of pianissimo. And it goes on for quite a while. We have some hairpins in the bars that follow. But it's finding the right kind of sound, the right kind of attention to that sound that's very important. to highlight how Beethoven uses dramatic change and even silence to create this sometimes drama and relief. In measure 92, we get to a set of chords, a cadence in C minor. That's setting something up. We're expecting something very dramatic. This is followed by a half note and an eighth note pause. And his use of silence is so effective. So it's very important to be able to play with that sense of silence by creating that drama in the rests without moving, with feeling the intensity of where we came from. And this is followed by something in C major. So here he's playing with surprise, which he loves to do. So we follow these chords with something very lighthearted in C major, kind of singing, kind of dance-like, however you feel it. But again, it's these contrasts that once you're aware of how maybe strange and unexpected they are, you can highlight with the use of timing, with the use of sound and vibrato. The next big structural moment is in bar 103, and this is where there's a lot of debate, because this is a recap in a way. We have the same material that we had in the exposition. However, the recap is usually in the tonic key and sort of going back through the material but somewhat resolved. Here we are in E minor, so this is not the tonic key in any way. And he punctuates this recap with the four-note motive played in fortissimo with fortes on every chord. There's a sense of defiance, a sense of fate that we get here. In the recap, we have the same contrasted figure, bar by bar, that we had earlier in the piece of the dotted rhythm in forte, followed by the motive in piano. However, it's important to note that unlike the first time where we have these sforzandos or reinforcements on every beat, this time we don't. So there's something more sustained, more legato about the way the dotted rhythm motive is played. Now, the second recap, if you think of it that way, would be in bar 193. Some people think of the first recap as sort of a developmental recap in the wrong key that's getting us ready for measure 193, where we have a recap in the tonic key. Now, this is incredibly intense, the way that this recap comes about. We have the thematic, we have the motive overlapped with the theme. So now this motive is so intertwined with the thematic material, and it's really important to be able to highlight that. And I think a lot of that has to do with vibrato and the use of bow. So we are going to have the theme, the dotted rhythm theme, going through this entire passage. It starts again in the cello, and I think it's again using sort of a rubbing sense in the bow, where you're sort of pulling the sound. It's a slower bow speed. It's really well connected. How do I want to use my vibrato? Again, probably very sparingly, maybe even non-vibrato, so that it's more of a... Now again, the dotted rhythm theme is sort of going through transformations here. Clearly, Beethoven asks for piano. This is in bar 193, all the ways till we get to a crescendo that lasts only one bar, that erupts to a forte. Now, this is in typical fashion. As I mentioned earlier, Beethoven likes to keep dynamics down. There's a sense of tension. There's a sense of that pot's boiling, but you keep a lid on it. the natural tendency is to want to crescendo, to want to open up that phrase. However, it's way more effective if you can keep that tension in the dynamic. It's even more tension-filled because of that sense of wanting to open up. And when that eruption happens in one bar, it's incredibly exciting. So one of the decisions we often make before these crescendos is to actually almost diminuendo so that you have more to build from. I love about these late Beethoven quartets is sort of the way he treats every instrument equally. I mean, you hear that in the middle quartets to a degree, but in this first movement, it's so terrific how every instrument gets to play the theme. And the second theme in the recapitulation at bar 223, it's given to the viola. I'd like to highlight the beginning of the Coda at measure 232, how the theme is passed, or the motive is passed from the cello to the viola to the second violin. The dynamics in the Coda are very important. If you see in 236, we're in forte. Then we have sforzandos every bar, and then finally sforzandos every 2 beats. So it's gradually getting even more intense with the sense of rhythm and things getting closer together, followed by diminuendo, followed by this giant crescendo that takes us to bar 247. And you have one last gasp at the theme in the cello and the viola. Measure 254 has a challenge in that the lower voices have 16th notes that are very soft but very charged, and there has to be a sense of turbulence in this figure. The ensemble is quite difficult. We often are focused on each downbeat with the first violin, who has the whole note figure. So that, in a way, keeps us together. Even playing those 16th notes, there's a sense of maybe following each other's fingers, really being sensitive to the ensemble. If it's not together, it sounds a little messy. It doesn't sound intense. It sounds a little chaotic. The last 3 bars are also difficult for the ensemble. The first violin is sort of has the 16ths, and the lower voices have these chords. One way of doing this is to practice in pairs again, where the viola, or whoever you decide, could be the second violin, is connected to the first violin. They really find a way of getting the sense of timing in the ensemble, and the other voices can go with the person leading the quarter notes. But finding that timing and sort of creating the right drama at the end is challenging. We've gone through many different ways of doing that. It's very important to notice that after the last chord, that we have the rests followed by a fermata at the end of the bar. So there's a sense of drama by holding the tension. Anyway, that's some thoughts on how to approach the first movement of Beethoven's Opus 132.